This is Radio Heinlein, Episode 1, Awaiting Elevation. Welcome to the very first episode of Radio Heinlein. I'm your host, Michael, and in this series, I'll be diving into the release of Elevation, the upcoming foundational core set for Netrunner. Previously codenamed Dawn, this set isn't just introducing new cards. It's arriving alongside a major rotation, both in size and significance. All remaining cards from the Fantasy Flight era of the game will rotate out. To start exploring this big topic, I had the opportunity to talk to three great community members, Aksu, Wu, and Bridgeman. You'll hear their introductions in just a moment. In this episode, we're starting with the runner side of things, focusing primarily on the Shaper faction. What defining cards are rotating out? What needs replacing? Where is Shaper headed? And where should it be headed? Let's get into it. Here are our guests, Aksu, Wu, and Bridgeman. I would like you guys to quickly introduce yourselves for those who are not familiar with you in the Netrunner community. Aksu, we'll just go alphabetical order. Please, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Alright, yo, what's up? I'm Aksu. I'm basically a decent Netrunner player. Currently probably doing more like commentary stuff than actually playing Netrunner.
Bob, you're up next.
Hey, I'm Wu. I stream on Mondays at WooTube. I play dumbass decks, and I'm not a good Netrunner player, but I do enjoy building some jank.
All right, I guess I should go.
Yeah, Bridgeman, go ahead.
Hello, I'm Bridgeman, or Finn, and I've played Netrunner for a long time. For the last 6 or so years, I've been pretty competitive about it, less so this year, but competed in the last 5 world championships, a bunch of other continentals tournaments and stuff. So a lot of trying to play the game in a competitive way, although chilling a bit more this year, but I'm still participating in some stuff. And also I stream the game sometimes. It hasn't happened in a while, but I might get back into that next week. So yeah, that's me.
Okay, thank you very much. My assessment of how much can we cover in an hour, there's no way we're going to manage to cover everything. So I would suggest that we start by just picking a faction. So let's talk about Shaper. Shaper, when we look at the cards that are rotating, and I'm just focusing on looking at, let's say, the top 30 cards that are used across decks. I ran some statistics on the deck lists that are present on Netrunner DB. And for the sake of the listeners, I shared some spreadsheet for the other participants of this podcast and broke down the usage of cards in Shaper decks across first all restrictions lists since the June 2020 restriction list. That's the one that banned all currents and switched from the restriction formats of unicorn cards over to just banning. And of course, going back that far, we have a completely different card pool. So many cards that aren't rotating for Dawn. They have already rotated. But if one looks a bit later, so more recent ban lists, let's say the one from September 23 in March 24, we actually already see a case where there's not that much that is used in Netrunner DB decks. And it should be mentioned, this is not just tournament decks. It's all decks. In those decks, we can see that really the only things in the top 30 cards that are used but will be going out are Diesel, that's a big one, Dirty Laundry, DJ Fenris is used, significantly less than Diesel. Diesel hovers around like 80% of all decks. Dirty Laundry somewhere varies a bit depending on the restriction list, but it can go between like 60% to, let's say, between 50 and 60% of the decks use it. But DJ Fighters is another big one. You could point to Parisha, Clot, of course, although it's used on about 20% of the decks. But the point being that there aren't that many. Shaper is seemingly a faction that is making use of the modern card pool and isn't heavily reliant on the older cards. I'll start by leaving it at that. Do you guys have any thoughts about that fact that Shaper seems to be making use of so little from the past compared to some of the other factions?
So I think it kind of makes sense. I think there's a difference in design philosophy between NSG and FFG. So like FFG did allow to make these interesting weird pieces for Shaper more than like current, I think, NSG does. If you think about stuff like customized secretary or something, feels like it wouldn't really be designed nowadays, right?
It definitely wouldn't.
So should we understand that, should we call it weirdness of the FFG days compared in strictly, let's say, raw power doesn't live up to that which NSG has provided a Shaper faction, and therefore the FFG cards are simply not as relevant? Something to that effect?
Yeah, especially like I think the data we have from Netrunner DB is probably mostly from people that build decks that are kind of at least decently competitive, right? That they are actually trying to build the best deck around, where really these like interesting pieces don't kind of fit in the same box as some of the more robust pieces from NSG stuff.
Bob, you wanted to say something?
I was going to say that one of the potential main reasons for that is maybe the quintessential Shaper card, which would be rotating, isn't rotating because they reprinted self-modifying code in Ashes. If they hadn't reprinted self-modifying code in Ashes, then I think things change considerably more. But I think you're correct in terms of the fact that currently, like, I think Shaper has the easiest time here getting away with not really having to make massive changes. Losing Diesel is probably the biggest thing that they have, but they actually have a lot of other options. Draw in Shaper right now, okay, it might not quite be as good as Diesel, but, you know, you've got Nuka, you could play VRcation, maybe people start playing Joyride, you've got Anicam, you've got Lilypad. There's a lot of good options there.
Yeah, Shaper is the faction with like best to draw easily, so like it's not that big of a deal.
Indeed, the entire topic of Diesel is actually something that I wanted to get back to. You touched upon a lot of things that are related, Bob, but Bridgeman, you also wanted to add something, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, I just had kind of a question around this, because it seems like we're saying that only a few FFG cards are like that are used are going to rotate, but also there are way more NSG cards than FFG cards at this point in the card pool, right? So that's also a reason, I figure. Or is it compared to other factions?
If I'm not mistaken, I'll be switching to the other sheets. I believe that there are some factions that are, let's say, at least more reliant on some FFG cards.
Okay, that's fair.
Taking, for instance, a Criminal is having more cards from the absolute latest restriction list is quite new. I mean, it happened, 1.5 months ago it came out or something like that. But if one looks at the restriction list before that, you have such cards as, Dirty Laundry, half of the decks, Inside Job, Diversion of Funds, Earthrise Hotel, Miss Bones, even Sneak Door Beta is like in the fourth of the decks, Career Fire, Amakua. So there's a lot of them in Criminal. Without remembering every single faction, I would say that Shaper seems to have slightly lower reliance on FFG cards than some of the other factions.
I actually think It does seem to be missing from here. I don't know if it's just not showing up for some reason, but maybe the biggest thing which Shaper's going to lose is Aesops. Because without Aesops, like we've just been given Muse, we've just been given Coalescence. That is what half the Shaper decks are doing right now in terms of their money. To suddenly lose that, okay, you've got spec work is a card and it's seen good play and it can kind of be pseudo Aesops, but that might actually be the card that affects Shaper the most in terms of the fact that for an irreplaceable loss.
Yeah, it kind of lets you build this like engine Shaper deck, right? Where you like just trigger stuff and that's your whole econ engine. And otherwise you have to rely more on these like event pieces, I guess.
That's actually something that I really wanted to get into, which is Shaper has, if one looks at early history, I would say that broadly speaking, Shaper represented in some sense the late game beast runner. Of course, there are a lot of exceptions historically, but you would associate frequently Shaper with like, they will not be capable of pushing as hard as Criminal. We're talking FFG era. This is not NSG era. They would not be capable of pushing as hard in the early game, but you leave them cooking for a while and they will crush the corporation more or less regardless of what they do. So you have to force them to interact earlier than the Shaper would like. Then I don't know if one should consider Haley to be that kind of deck. That one was quite wild, but certainly big rig Shaper, both coming out of Kate McCaffrey. Well, Chaos Theory was never really that, let's say, that wasn't a very prominent deck, but Kate comes to mind firstly, but I think Haley also qualifies as like, you give me some time and after that you have no chance. And the more modern Shaper, which also I should say seems to be appreciated by the community, is the one that I'm going to just mentally focus around Anicam. The more event heavy, the more run heavy, the more interactive, the Shaper that through the card design has been dragged out of the like turtling on the other side of the table. And what I'm wondering is whether, firstly, I presume that that's going to stay, but secondly, is it something that the Dawn card pool should emphasize and maybe kill off the old Shaper? Is that where it's going? Is that what it should be? I'm not sure what one would want for the Shaper faction in this regard.
That's a good question. I think the card pool always needs runners to be able to go big rig, to not make it so like the meta is only glacier decks, right? But it's not fun either if they like get there every time and just crush every game, right? So, but yeah, if runners are going slow, big rigs, then the corps will be going fast. So you need tools on both sides to have a balanced game. So hopefully we'll still have a little bit of both, right? I mean, Turbine is still going to be around.
Is there anyone that can do big rig currently in the modern meta?
Any faction, or you mean decks, or
is there some particular ID that, let's say, stands above the other, either the other IDs or even the other factions as like, oh yeah, here's a big rig ID which does big rig stuff which the other factions can't really do or will not do as well?
Good question. I feel like it's like a super nuanced thing, because like Anarchs can go pretty big rig, but they have more tools to like get in early and get past ice with tricks like Bankar or like Botulus, whereas Shaper is the one that just gets like a bunch of breakers with big strength as the big rig, unless they're playing like Arizona and a bunch of Trojans that bypass stuff. So Shaper is the best at getting like the super efficient breakers, no tricks. And in terms of the IDs, I think usually it just fits best in Lat, is my opinion. This is kind of what I'm currently playing in Standard as well, because it just lets you set up faster and more easily. But it's not like you couldn't put an engine like that or a setup like that in another Shaper ID. It just tends to be like the most value is kind of what lets you set up this kind of thing the fastest.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the most competitive one, right? Just beating raw card draw is kind of hard, I think. If you want like a big rig engine kind of thing, you can also like play Padma and do your charge things. But I think most of the Shaper big rig decks just rely on Turbine being kind of a bastard card, right?
I guess I have a follow-up question to precisely that. When I'm thinking of, you mentioned Anarch, and I'm remembering my time at, not the latest Worlds, but the Worlds before that in Barcelona. And I went up against, I mean, Hoshiko was still a big thing back then. It's not that it's gone now, but back then it was like Hoshiko all the way. That was at least my impression. And I distinctly remember going up against a couple of Hoshikos, which were very much like, there's gonna be so many companions. I will invade your board space, Mr. Corporation, with so much crap on my end of the table. But it was also quite evident that those kind of Hoshiko decks were reliant on getting there. Like if they did not get all of their stuff, then you still had some time to do something as the corporation. Just thinking back to that kind of Hoshiko deck and thinking, how is Shaper doing big rig better than this? And I'm not saying that they can't match it, but it just struck me as like, isn't this, might as well go with this if one was to choose between Shaper and Anarch for this purpose?
So I have at least one answer for this. So because of how the most efficient breakers are designed right now, it's like usually it's Cleaver and Buzzsaw and then Turbine. And so you get them to 5 strength. That was the old, like, okay, this is Doom Rig. But people started toying with decks that go far above that because you can exploit this, right? Anarch usually only plays 1 Turbine, I think. Maybe you can play 2, actually. But yes, some Shaper decks, at least the one I'm playing right now, you can play Hush quite comfortably and then recur it if you're playing the program Shaper. So the Hush will bring the strength of the breakers down. It's easier for you to play double Turbine in my current build. But other than that, I don't see a big difference. Like it might even be better in some cases to play the Anarch one because then you have the banker effect to get past some problematic guys. But if you're in a meta where you might absolutely need Hush or like really high strength breakers, then Shaper might be better.
Shaper also kind of gets there faster, right? You have not trick shot, overclock and self-modify code to get your rig online faster. What Anarch can kind of do.
I would disagree there. I think that Anarch with price, and if you really need it, things like Gachapon and stuff, I think Anarch can set up faster than Shaper. Self-modifying code is great, but it's expensive, even if you've got like overclock credits. I genuinely think that most of the Hoshiko decks will set up faster than a lot of Shapers which are out there.
And they have moshing as well, which is a big deal.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah. I would say Anarchs are very good at going through the decks fast, so that they're good at installing all the stuff fast.
Yeah, I guess you then lose value at the point where you are there. Like you use all of your pieces to get there into the board state, and then you're kind of stuck with where Shaper can still have these like win cons, stuff like deep dive and copulation and everything like that.
One thing that this entire conversation, especially since Black was mentioned, and I briefly earlier mentioned something like I want to get back to Diesel. Diesel being such a, I think it's fair to call it, for the faction at least, an iconic card. And in my opinion, also a very elegant card. Just draw 3 cards is an eye-catching ability and clear in at least both to beginners and to experienced player the power you get from that effect. However, not to say that Diesel doesn't have a place in the current card pool. I'm looking at Diesel and thinking, as someone who has been playing the game since Lunar, Diesel is Shaper for me. It's central. But I'm wondering, given what we see in the current card pool, is it necessarily central to the designers of Dawn?
I just don't think it's needed. I think there's other options right now. I think as much as sticking 3 diesels in your Shaper deck is a very easy way to start deck building. I think you can easily go other routes. I think almost the decks which might miss it more are things like the criminal decks, which were playing 3 diesels. Some of them were mixing between diesels and nukers, but a lot of them ended up playing diesel over nuker, because what criminal needs and is missing is just that cheap, fast draw. So as much as like, I don't actually think it will massively impact Shaper, and I don't think it's necessary, criminal players might suffer worse.
Yeah, I think biggest thing about diesel going is that it's kind of a thing that you probably should have in the core set, like that Dawn is going to be. You have VR Vacation in the system gateway, but you probably should have a draw card for your like faction that is supposed to be the faction with the best draw, I think. And I think there probably is going to be something like that, I would assume at least.
Yeah, this one is hard to assess for me because I think Diesel is obviously a really good card. In most Shaper decks, I think 3X makes sense. However, Shaper will still have good draw. Like Nuka is pretty good. It's not quite the same in my opinion, but it's a decent enough draw that I don't feel like you have to print a Diesel. But it's hard to say, like, I don't know what the effect on the game is if we don't have Diesel. Like, what are we losing?
It probably doesn't matter right now, but imagine you don't print draw for a couple of sets for Shaper, and then you lose some of these pieces. You maybe don't have Nuka anymore, and don't have Joyride anymore. And I think Shaper could like start be kind of light and draw. So like just having something in the core set feels, I think, right. But
at least right now, Joyride it's a card where if you tie up your econ or your draw into running, that you can always run into different issues, especially draw, because like if this is what you need to set up, then if they just ice R&D now, you're probably in trouble. Verification has also proven to be kind of clunky, so that's kind of why I'm only mentioning Nuka, but Verification is not that bad. It might be able to be played in the future, I'm not sure. But I think you're right. It would be bad if Shaper ends up in a place where there isn't a lot of draw. Like they need some kind of advantage, I think.
Something that I don't think there has been any utterance about from NSG on the topic. And really, we don't even need to speculate about how NSG feels about this. I'll just ask you guys, how do we feel about functional reprints? Because let's say that we consider Diesel. This is a pretty good design. It works well. Aksu made a good point. Probably in a base set, there should be something that doesn't rotate for a while that captures an essential mechanic of the faction, so drawing cards. Seems like this Diesel thing has worked out for quite a long time. And how do you guys feel about Dawn doing, instead of Diesel, I don't know, just printing Petrol, which happens to be 0 cost and draw 3 cards in Shaper? Do we feel like that's the way to solve it, or should Petrol have some other ability attached to it for the sake of being different?
I think it's super easy to start tacking on abilities on cards like that feel like they're kind of empty without them, but it might like detract from the simplicity, and there's some sort of elegance by just having draw 3 on the text box, which I think might be lost. So like I wouldn't be opposed to having like a Diesel reprint basically, although maybe as an Eternal player it would not be optimal, but I think that's an afterthought for everybody else.
The first thought I had was, if there is a functional reprint where it's identical, I like it to still have the same name and stuff, so you can actually like play your old copies of that card or your alternate arts from back in the day. I don't like when they make a new card with a different name or whatever. Now, maybe there are like really good reasons for them to do that, but it's just a personal little annoyance.
Yeah, Data Sucker Leech.
Yes. It would be really nice to be able to play your old.
There's also Running Hot.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Running Hot.
Which I don't know if anyone plays that, but Running Hot as well, because they wanted to change from brain damage to core damage. So like, just change the only change is terminology of that one.
Exactly. So in that case, it was because it uses the old terminology. In some cases, I guess it's for functionality and stuff like that. But as a general thing, it's nice to be able to use your old cards. Now, as for if something feels like integral to the game, I think reprinting it makes sense. Otherwise, I think it's oftentimes it's not bad to just try something different and see how things play out. You should still have draw, of course, but like maybe it doesn't need to be diesel. If for whatever reason you find that no, this is really important, then sure. Like I wouldn't mind a diesel reprint, but I could also see how it's interesting to explore what the game is like without it.
People always like think that some piece is fundamental on how Netrunner kind of works. Like some people might say, for example, stuff like Jackson or like Spin Doctor, where like is or are like really important for Netrunner to be able to exist. But like there was a short while at least where like neither of those were standard and the game functioned perfectly well. So I think that kind of works same for now.
Damon Stone was pretty clear about that. Damon Stone saying Jackson Howard is a crutch. And then people just got, what was it? Jesus, what's the card? Preemptive action got printed and people were like, okay, I guess I need to live with this thing now.
Yeah, it's just kind of makes you like switch up what you like expect. I think that's can be sometimes healthy, I think.
It was quite nice. I mean, in Kitara, there was a whole cycle of cards, right? It was preemptive action, distract the masses, drudge work, attitude adjustment. So many cards trying to like show that maybe it's possible to do this in a different way, and it kind of worked. And I'm kind of excited to see what that will look like in Dawn, because there's going to be a lot of stuff like that, I guess.
There is an aspect which I think I do want to echo the sentiment of Aksu, however, on the topic of the elegance of the card. As someone who has both fondly remembers the time of, I had a gap, this is that tangent, but I used to play Lunar and then like up until roughly like Mombad. So that's a whole bunch of data packs. And not because Mombad, like there are so many who are like, oh, I quit because Mombad was terrible, ruined the game and so on. Like that wasn't why. I just had a hiatus for other reasons. But I remember cards from those days having at least many of the core ones. Sure, it's a bit of like rose-tinted glasses, but to put it simply, they had less words. The cards felt like they had less words on them. And I would say that NSG designs certainly are very exciting in the ways in which some of these cards can interact and do just genuinely interesting card interactions. Would be sufficient to just look at the D-Res stuff that happened in the last set. Not necessarily good, but interesting. Some of them were good, but point being that the excitement that can bring out all of the different interactions, that's one thing. But there is definitely something in how the core mechanics manifest themselves, like they take center stage if the cards are simpler in some ways. I think that's a big difference. For instance, if one ventures to play either with just old cards or goes to try out this reboot project, which just tries to balance the old cards, playing some games of like the older style has there's some elegance to the games. It is much more focused around the core mechanics, it seems to me at least. And I just feel like there should be some value to be considered for that.
I mean, funny enough, those games still exist in the modern game, but you do have to be prepared to play other formats. I play a surprising amount of system gateway games because I find them incredibly fun. Because all you're doing with system gateway games is you're playing the basic fundamentals of Netrunner. And I think that system gateway is reasonably well balanced. It potentially, I'm not talking about the pre-built decks, obviously. This is custom built decks. I think there's enough interesting decks in there and what have you that exists. Now, what I'm kind of hoping is that System Gateway plus Dawn creates this really nice format that is just your fundamentals, because for quite a long time, the way for people, for new players to get into Netrunner has been to play Startup, which hasn't always been In fact, it has rarely been, in my opinion, a good starting format. It's often been as broken or sometimes more broken than standard. It's been like pretty wild. I know that people like Lucy are working on it currently to kind of make it fundamentally like a better format. But I still think that the best way of people going in, newer players going in, is with an evergreen format, which they can pick up, they can play some games. If they come back to it in 6 months, it's the same cards, it's the same games, and they can just enjoy the game for what it is, which is a good game. You don't have to throw in everything else to have fun, interactive Netrunner. You can have, just your System Gateway. If you can expand that to just be System Gateway and Dawn, and that's an evergreen concept that anyone can pick up and have a fun game of fundamental Netrunner, I think that's what I'm mostly hoping for from the set.
I absolutely agree with this. The entire notion of some new or just casual player thing that comes to mind, like just to avoid them feeling the fear of missing out and fatigue from seeing new sets being printed when they maybe only have the time to mentally invest themselves in their small like Dawn and Gateway card pool. That's all they can realistically invest themselves in. And if they get to invest themselves in that, then they get super excited because they can play around with the ideas of what can I do with this stuff. And like on a personal, that's how I, once upon a time, I used to, long time ago when I was playing Magic the Gathering, but I got into casual vintage, which like, sure, there were these players next to me playing the most crazy overpowered Moxes and Lotuses and whatever. But casual vintage was the format where the game format told me it's fine. You don't have to keep up. It's your deck. Just play the thing you like. Casual vintage let me not worry about the game. I could if I wanted to, but the format allowed me to just play what I wanted with proxies and just not be stressed by the community spirit. Not that it necessarily is stressing, but I really like the point that Bai is making here, that it can be stressing to new players to feel like, oh, everyone else is just saying like, oh, you haven't got the latest set, well, then you can't play, or like, that's not you're playing a broken format or whatever. That is a very, very good point. I really appreciate it being made.
Yeah, I totally agree as well. Like I remember some of the most fun games was when I was starting out with Netrunner with the original core set, even though that set is like imbalanced as hell, probably. But it was really, really fun learning the deck and learning the game and exploring deck building in it. So yeah, the fundamentals of the game are really strong.
So then to go back to so I introduced the notion of diesel going out. How does this affect things? Do we want it around? Is this necessary? Bridgeman, I like the point which you made of, well, we had a time when like Jackson was out. Well, actually, you also talked about this. When Jackson was out, Spin Doctor was not out yet. And people just tried to figure things out. And it certainly got us into an interesting space. The same would happen if just Diesel was dropped. But yeah, I suspect that the aspect of having a core set which works as a because System Gateway is still the thing which I understand NSG is pushing as like, are you new to the game? Get this thing. And then Dawn would be like, you want more? Get Dawn. That's how I've understood things. And yeah, it strikes me as like, it would they probably would want to go with having that expansion set not be necessarily conservative, but also not be too wild, so that it's something that feels, you're extending the feeling of System Gateway, which already has some spiciness to it. It's not plain.
So I totally agree, like with a lot of the points, like if it's an extension, if it's like pretty clean basic design, but very Netrunner, I would like it for it to be a little more, like when I see the System Gateway, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of danger. I one of the things that I liked with the original core set is, I don't know, there's so many nasty cards like Snare and Scorched Earth. I feel like I would like more of that stuff in like a core set. That's just you die or you're totally wrecked by this. I don't remember. Was Aggressive Secretary in the core set? I think so.
Yeah, I believe it was. Yeah.
It was.
Yeah, so like Project Junebug, those cards are just like you see them and you're just like, oh, this is something I need to worry about. I would like to see more of that. Just as clean, scary cards. Because I feel like Netrunner should revolve around threats like that and scary cards.
Yeah, I had a friend that I introduced to the game. I had some pre-builts, one for each faction. And first I tried to play with slightly nicer, like I set up something like HB Glacier kind of against, I think it was Criminal or something. And then I asked, do you want to try me playing something else? I can play Jinteki. And it was a spiky Jinteki deck. I think PE maybe even, or RH. Not sure. But he said sure, and after the game he says, after one or two games, it's like, fuck me, I hate this. This is not, I don't like playing against this. So I was like, you want to switch sides? And I was like, sure. And I was a bit adventurous, so like I ran into R&D and I get hit by a snare, I die, and I said, actually, this is the best shit. I love this game. I love Jinteki. I'm only playing Jinteki for, and I've seen that, those eyes light up of like, the guy hit my snare. There is something about that feeling that very few other cards can recreate. And yeah, that needs to be in the game. It's beginners get destroyed by it and love it just as much when they destroy someone else with it.
That was like what was so amazing about Netrunner initially. I believe the first two games I played were over within like 2 turns, you know. I think the first game, my brother just ran my hand 3 times and accessed 7 points. And I was PE or whatever. And then like the second game, kind of same thing, but instead of getting agendas, he got snares, you know? So yeah, just how many like moments there were going into it. Maybe, well, I don't feel like System Gateway is quite that. I feel like it's a lot more tame. But if Dawn is supposed to complement it, then maybe Dawn could be more like that. So yeah. There's so many crazy cards, like, you know, Account Siphon, Parasite. You suddenly realize, like, wait, ice is not permanent. You can trash ice. And Sneak Door, like, oh wait, you can, you know, get into a server from another server. Inside job, you can bypass ice. All these moments, right? So yeah, simple playing cards, but yeah.
This does touch upon something like a slightly tangential topic, but one thing that I also wanted to ask you guys, which is, if I was to be a bit reductive about some of what you said just now, Bridgeman, is that if one looks at core set, well, I mean, core set is also, it was the first set. So obviously with it's that decade, right? It's decade or even older than that.
Even more, yeah. 13
It
years.
was 2012, so 13 years.
Yeah. Like the designers, even FFG, but especially NSG, like we've learned a few things since then about the design of the game. So like some things that are appealing about the core set are also potentially considered as its flaws. But so, which means like System Gateway is a bit more, let's say, rounded. It's more well-rounded. It should stand up to long-term scrutiny for like both beginners and like tournament players. Everyone should be happy with this thing. And I'm just thinking, one aspect of design, which I've seen, it comes up every now and then. And I believe that there was a big discussion where like when Hoshiko was everywhere, there was a conversation which I think is relevant for the upcoming Dawn, which is value IDs. Value IDs and value cards in general, but we could just focus on IDs versus things which, let's say, IDs or cards that expect of the player of like, I'm not giving you immediate calculable value here. I'm expecting you to play different. And if you play different, I might reward you in ways which might be slightly more, which might be difficult to quantify just in the term of raw credit or click value. And of course, Hoshiko being an obvious case, Lat being an obvious case of those like value cards, value IDs. It's very much like I can just convert this with the regular click to credit conversion. But if you look at other IDs, I'm thinking something like Omar, Exile, Nasir, my favorite shaper identity of all time, bar none. Nasir, what else have we got? Haley on some level, but I'm not sure that's still, you could maybe argue that there's some value stuff going on in there, but you get, or Geist, which regardless of the discussion about whether that identity should actually be in criminal, but since it's established a new archetype, so whatever, it's criminal. These are not value IDs in the modern basic sense. And I'm wondering, where does one want to go in Dawn with this dichotomy? Or it doesn't need to be a dichotomy, but it just feels like it. When some ID comes out and it's an obvious value ID, it just trumps all others, it seems. And the non-value IDs frequently just fall off the wayside.
It's just really hard to design IDs that actually like do interesting things and work well in the game. Like I think the most recent success, Arizona, basically hugely interesting ID and still competing with that. But just competing with reg value is pretty difficult.
I think there's multiple tiers to this, like design of IDs when I think about it, because I think I kind of agree with what was said. So I would say there could be an ID. I don't know if I have an example of this, but let's say an ID that just gives you a credit at the end of every turn. This is like the most reg-ass ID ever, right? There's like, it doesn't tie you to any mechanics in the game. It doesn't require anything from your deck. You can build your deck with it in any way you want. So that's one layer. Then the next layer is like, well, okay, you get credits or whatever from this ID, but you need to interact in a certain way, like Hoshiko, there's a level before that, like Kate, which requires something of you, but it doesn't interact at all with the opponent. So you need to install a particular type of card. So it kind of makes you build your deck in a certain way. The more niche, the more cool I think the IDs become. So you could argue, guys, this is more niche, like it's trash effects. So that makes it even more cool, I guess. But then like something like Hoshiko is like, well, you need to do something with the corp. You need to run one of their servers. So it's nice in the way that it interacts with the corp, but you're doing it in kind of a boring way. Like you could run literally any server and then you get value. I would argue that something like Gabe is more interesting. Like there's a particular server you need to run to get the value. But then I think like the ultimate layer of IDs is IDs that are like, you're sure that you could tie them kind of back to value somehow sometimes, but their effects are they feel more unique. Something like IG is like, okay, now the face down cards in archives suddenly have a completely new meaning. Like this is a completely new game. Like Cybernetics Division, everyone gets a lower hand. Chronos Protocol like changes how net damage interacts. You got like Harpy scored that suddenly you can only steal one agenda each turn. I think these are like the most interesting IDs in my opinion, because it makes every matchup feel kind of different. Now, all of these kind of tiers can lead to very unique decks. Like small differences can lead to very unique decks, but I think the later tier is the best one. But then I definitely accept the signs like Gabe. Yeah, I think the further away from the first one they are, the better.
So basically not ETF.
Basically, yeah.
Like value IDs have their place. Like I think something like Hoshiko kind of lets you build your deck into a way that you want to actually play, which I think, especially in a core set, kind of does make sense. You just have to make sure that your IDs are not like too good, so they like trump value over every single other ID. But I think like there is value in having like core set with IDs that are kind of simple and let you build whatever you want. For example, I think like Hoshiko lets you build break stuff, lets you build ice destruction, lets you build mulch. Like currently, like Hoshiko is just so versatile that you can kind of play anything from the ID.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I remember there was, I think his newsletter is called Rapa Nui. He might have a different name, but it's a guy who has a Netrunner newsletter. He attends tournaments and whatnot. And I remember him actually saying at the height of the like people started to say, should we actually maybe ban Hoshiko? He was actually writing in his newsletter of like, you know what? It should be the opposite. Every faction should have at least one fairly straight up value ID, because if I don't misremember his argument, it sets a baseline and it allows us to explore the faction's card pool well. It shaves off the rough edges. If you have some cards which are maybe sort of janky, then the ID comes and helps those janky cards out. And now we can have a breadth of decks because the strength of the ID helps with carrying all of the other. And this is the way to having a broad variety of decks indeed. Might be the same ID everywhere, but the decks will be more broad in their application.
Yeah, exactly. The real question just comes down to balance, I think. And like, you don't want to see Hashiko everywhere. You want these interesting ideas also to be functional and working. You want your like nulls, omars, everything to like function alongside these like value ideas that let you like build these interesting decks in a other vector, I think.
Well, I think we've covered a lot, and so given all of what we've said, I'm wondering what you guys want to add on Shaper and Runner.
I had one note, because I took a bunch of notes. So one note I had was about recursion, because DJ Fenris is leaving the game, and also labor rights. Then recursion has been a big thing for runners in general for a while. Usually because, well, it's nice to get cards back. It gives you consistency, but also sometimes it's needed against like games that go very long. So slow decks, you need to like get your deck back to like consistently have the money to do things, or if you're up against like some kind of net damage deck. So I was kind of curious about how is that going to work nowadays. We do have like Ashen Epilogue and Buffer Drive, so maybe we'll see even more of those. Those are already seen play. That was just a small note that I had. Also, another note was Asset Hate is leaving a lot. Harisha, Imp, Miss Bones. So I'm curious how. Yeah.
Yeah, Parisha is going. That's a big one. It's actually for the listeners who, in contrast to those present in the call, do not have the statistics. Parisha is present in the last couple of restriction lists. It's in the top 30. But they're bouncing up and down in like how high it is with respect to like percent of decks that use it. But Parisha is definitely in the restriction list. It's a non-trivial thing leaving, and the recursion as well. Certainly Fenris. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been such a no-brainer solution for asset decks for Shaper for a long time. So that's kind of a big deal, especially because I at first I thought SMC was leaving, but apparently it isn't. So then like SMC with Parisha was like a very natural combo to consistently deal with asset decks. But what are you going to do now? Also, small note, maybe now Harmony Air Therapy will see more play.
No.
Oh, you might set Aksu off with that one.
Don't talk about boss favorite card.
Yeah, let's all play Harmony. Let's play Harmony. It's a good card. It's fine. No worries.
I'll just interject on the topic of recursion. I am still extremely confused about the existence of Ashen Epilogue. I don't understand. I'm not saying, like, I just don't understand why it was printed. Because on one hand, maybe they wanted to say, like, hey, all of you PE decks and whatever that grind out the stack, that's not going to happen anymore. Maybe that was what was going on in the design of NSG, or maybe there was something else going on. I just genuinely don't understand. This is just me flaunting my ignorance. I don't get this card. I don't get why this exists. I mean, Levy AR lab access was a thing. Not saying that this hasn't been around ever, but I'm somewhat shocked at the reintroduction of a form of Levy. I don't get it. And of course, the existence of Ashen affects just generally the space of recursion as well. Possibly for Anarch more than others. That's arguable. But yeah, it's certainly, since you mentioned Ashen, Bridgeman, it's a card that confuses me.
So my thoughts on that is that I think we're moving, or NSG has been moving away more and more from like drip. So like just setting up an engine and then you rely on that forever. So it might be that you actually need your deck back once it's finished, right? Or it's like, what are you doing as a runner once your deck is over? I don't know. It's kind of weird because it's not strictly necessary to play this. It's not even good in some cases, or in a lot of cases probably, but it might be like a nice toolkit to have in your deck building box going forward.
Yeah, I think with the fact that certain things are going, for instance, as mentioned, like DJ and labor rights, I think Ashen is actually pretty necessary for, in particular, Anarch decks to be able to get the full value which they need. I actually see what they're doing there.
And actually, like, if you're worried about it, so far a lot of solutions have been playing DJ 2 labor rights and 1 Ashen, so that you can like labor rights your Ashen back if you have DJ. But you're not even going to be able to do that anymore. So I don't know what you do nowadays. Buffer drive your Ashen back or something. I'm not sure. But it's going to be a little worse than it was before, probably. But it's going to see play.
It's certainly a good point that what Ashen appears to do, or like the place of Ashen in the card pool prior to Dawn and prior to Dawn rotation, is very, very different from post rotation. That's indeed a very, very good point.
Yeah. And also like they've made it so you can't just go infinite kind of. I think it's even hard to go through your deck 1 time, 2 times. They've even put in a fail safe so you can't Ashen forever.
I mean, it removes itself from the games by technicality, but yeah, removing 5 card makes its like effect less noticeable or less extreme.
I think it also means that you can't just, like, you used to be able to occasionally fire a levy off because you just needed 5 new cards in hand, right? Ashen does have this slight risk if you're going to play your kit deck and be like, I'm just going to like Ashen back my 2 breakers when they get trashed or whatever. You are risking quite a significant amount there. So I can totally see. I actually think it's a pretty reasonable restriction which they've stuck on it, which just makes enough of a difference to be significant.
That's a really good point. You kind of want to set up all your important pieces before you can play your Ashen. Means it can often be a dead card, so it is a sacrifice to have in your deck, apart from the influence.
Yeah. And I think for a card that powerful, you should like that sacrifice should be there. It shouldn't just be like, I can just get my entire deck back for nothing.
Well, I very much appreciate you guys illuminating me, because at least it gives me it pulls me out of the confusion at least slightly. Oh, and then a minor thing, the interaction between, well, putting Ashen into your kit deck will soon be a thing that one will no longer need to worry about, because kit is also rotating to
That is
to chagrin the various to all of the kit players. I don't know if kit has grown, or well, certainly Lobby Soma made that ID grow in popularity. That's for certain. Aksu, Bob, is there something we haven't covered before we close up?
I don't think so. In terms of Shaper, like you say, I mean, we've probably talked about the main things. I genuinely think that the biggest thing is going to be Aesops. I think that's going to be the most interesting thing in terms of what the new set has, which might be an Aesops-like card. I'm not saying it should be the same, but maybe something which allows you to gain value from building your board. And, you know, we've got like something which is a bit more permanent than environmental testing. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what happens to particularly those engine decks, because I think the run-based sort of style ones they're kind of good to go right now. They're cooking with gas already.
Yeah. I'm wondering, like, what the hell are you going to do with Coalescence and Muse, you know, once the Aesops is gone? It used to be World Tree, but yeah.
Just bring back World Tree. Easy.
I wish.
Tiebreakers approved.
For the brief moment when World Tree was around and people had not yet broken that thing, It was such a wonderful time. I will say that as the one person that brought Ale to Worlds Barcelona, and it was a World Tree Ale on top of that, it was a fun time prior to people figuring out, oh, wait, we can actually take this up to 11 and just warp the entirety of Netrunner with this card. There was a fun time before World Tree was hated. It was something to be remembered.
Well, if you want to play some real good World Tree games, you need to play some Eternal, because there you can have 2 World Trees going on a Leprechaun.
Oh dear.
Firing off, getting back your Temujin contracts.
Oh,
yeah,
God.
It's like really, really nutty, but highly recommended.
I was having fun with World Tree after it was hated. But exploring the builds that were playing, like, what was it? It was like a lat build with 45 cards that just kind of ace ups engine, but you also have the World Tree.
Oh, the bad World Tree decks, yes.
And it was amazing.
Every now and then I reread, I believe he's Canadian, the Canadian player, Whiteblade. Every now and then I reread his StimHack blog post about, and it was actually written post World Tree. It was like, when Shaper is good, the meta is terrible. Something like that. It's a wonderful blog post where he's basically just making the case of like, listen, you don't want Shaper to be good. You don't want recursion and deck search just to actually work consistently, because we are here now and it's awful. I reread that every now and then and I think, the guy's maybe got a point, but it's so fun right now.
It's definitely been true a few times in history, especially with like the old style Shaper when it was only like Doomrig Shaper, right? Like do you remember the Cabonessa decks with Reseki and Surfer and Lamb? Like that was miserable.
I mean, every time Wu is good, the meta is bad, so.
Yeah.
Easy now.
Yeah. And that warranted a ban at the time, but like I felt like that for a long time. It was like, Shaper's good again. I hate it, you know. But nowadays, I do feel it's evened out a little bit.
You just needed to sacrifice World Tree on the altar of Netrunner players' sanity, and there you go.
I actually didn't mind World Tree that much. So I found a way, at least for the time, that I felt like it was comfortable to play against. I felt like there was a real sacrifice in playing World Tree, but yeah. Obviously, the Netrunner gods did not agree. But I see why it was banned still.
Okay, Aksu, any final words before we wrap up?
Not really. I'm just really excited for Dawn and for Elevation. I think it's going to be so sick.
Yes. It is called Elevation. I'm sure that everyone will remember. We'll switch over to calling it Elevation in, I don't know, half a year. Something like that.
Yeah, it will take time, but it will someday take root, I guess.
Well, with that, I would like to thank all of you 3 for coming, and I've enjoyed it greatly. At least we've gotten to talk about Shaper and Runner for a little bit. Next time, if I manage to gather you guys or some others, probably some corporations should also be discussed. There's just so much. There's so much to talk about with Dawn. So thanks again. And I hope to see you again in a future episode.
Well, thank you. It was fun being on.
Thanks.
And with that, we wrap up episode 1. Another big thanks to my guests, Aksu, Baram Wu, and Bridgeman, for sharing all of their insights. There's still plenty to explore with Elevation, so stay tuned for more. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it with a friend. If you want to hear more, make sure you subscribe. The music for this podcast is Mystery Things by Kjartan Abel. This is Radio Heinlein. Runners, run boldly. Sysops, stay vigilant.